So, if you've ever been to a potluck or a banquet in which somebody was hosting, what are some of the expectations you have of the host? If you were to leave there and to think, wow, they were a good host, what are the kinds of things they would have done for you? Maybe they welcome you at the door with a smile. They make you feel more than welcome in their home. Maybe they feed you well. Maybe they serve you drinks. They ask you if you need more to drink when your drink starts to run dry. You share good conversation. They don't speak ill of anyone there. All these things that a good host might do. Well, now I want you to think and imagine two different banquets being offered for you. At one, the host of the banquet believes he has great power and is overrun with pride. You are likely not invited for friendship. This isn't about bonding. This isn't about growing together as one. This is more about power. If it happens that you have more power or influence than this host, chances are you've been invited there to raise the host profile, to give the host more influence, maybe to be asked to do something for this host. Or perhaps you were invited because you owe this host of this banquet a favor. More likely, you're lower on the social ladder of this host than who really wants to hold this banquet to massage his ego. After all, it is covered with callousness and it needs some relief. It needs to be massaged and worked out on this particular day. Many have been invited, but so the host can pat himself on the back as to all the people who love him. You are there to be reminded who you are in the eyes of the host. And who you are in the eyes of the host might not be much. In fact, in the eyes of the host, you're next to nothing. You simply serve a purpose. Maybe you're not even looked on as fully human or as having the utmost value. This host has done some sort of favor, a favor for you, likely to remedy a situation that host may have had some cause in creating. But because of this favor, he expects you to jump when he calls. And it may be that you are there to make you believe that you owe your very well-being to this host, and that well-being can be compromised in the blink of an eye if you don't jump when the host calls. It's a troubling existence at this banquet that's offered. He wants you to fear him. In fact, you will get simply a morsel from the overflowing table at this banquet, while the host engorges himself in front of you. Now, the other banquet has a host who's much different. This host knows he has great power, yet is quite humble about it. This host has every reason to be boastful, but yet isn't. The host invites you to form a bond of friendship, not just serve a function at a banquet, not just to massage an ego, but to come and be a friend. Let us dine together. And it's more than a bond of friendship, it's a bond of love. You owe this host everything and have hurt this host dearly. But when you express this to the host says, don't worry, never fear. All is forgiven. He has done you the greatest favor, yet doesn't do it to make you feel obligated to him. He did it out of love, knowing that love given will be love returned. At this banquet, the spread on the table will seem more modest than the banquet of the other host, but everyone will somehow leave full and invited back for leftovers tomorrow. One host seeks to control, the other host seeks to empower. One host rules by fear, the other host rules by love. Hearing about these two banquets, which we've been invited to, I ask a simple question: which banquet would you want to attend? I think the answer for each and every one of us is obvious. We want to go where we're valued. We want to go where we're loved, where we're cared for. We want to go where we will find ourselves full. And indeed, when we read the story today of Jesus feeding the multitudes, we have a contrast of two separate banquets. For right before the feeding of the multitudes in the book of Matthew, we have the banquet of Herod. And we have the story of Herod who had arrested John the Baptist. And after arresting John the Baptist, Herod had held this great banquet. And the story tells us that Herod wanted to execute John the Baptist and put him and silence him, because John the Baptist had confronted him and told him that his marriage to his new wife Herodias was unlawful. It was sinful. But Herod had to silence him. Herod couldn't stand such a rebuke from someone as lowly as John the Baptist, roaming around in sackcloth and eating locust and wild honey. Herod had to do something about this. He put him in prison, wanted to put him to death, but he feared the crowds who followed John the Baptist. So he didn't. He didn't, that was, until he held this banquet. And his daughter was tasked to dance for the crowd. And she danced so well and pleased her father that he told her, you ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Well, Herodias, angry at John the Baptist, was working behind the scenes, and she counseled her daughter and said, ask him for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Now Herod had feared the crowds. He would not execute John the Baptist, though he wanted to, but at the request of his daughter and under the pressure of keeping his word, he did just that. And the event took place, which we now know has given us the common phrase that we often utter about someone's head on a silver platter. Because in that moment, Herod kept his promise and delivered John's head up to Herodias' daughter. A gruesome banquet, a banquet in which Herod is ruling with power and fear. He's massaging his own ego. He doesn't care about his subjects. He is seeking to increase his own profile. Indeed, the problem with his marriage to Herodias was that Herodias was this Herod's sister-in-law. See, this is Herod Antipas, and he married his sister-in-law. Not just out of simple lust, it seems, because what had happened is the region in which Jerusalem was located had been broken up into 3 different regions after Herod the Great had passed. And each of Herod's sons were given rule over one of these regions. And they became rivals because they all wanted to rule it all. And this is a move by Herod Antipas, who marries Herodias, unlawful as it was, to bring power into one. Because of Herodias' lineage, she could gain Herod more favor among the Jewish people and people of the other regions, so that they would look on him favorably. And he could go to Caesar and say, no, I should be put over this entire region. You don't even need Pilate. So it was as much a move of lust as it was a move of politics. It was a move of power on Herod's part. And when John the Baptist confronted him in it, the power continued to flow. The ego continued to thrive. And it cost John the Baptist his life. Jesus hears the story from John the Baptist's disciples, and he withdraws. Now, John the Baptist was family for Jesus. Why Jesus, with a crowd following him, doesn't stir up the crowd against Herod to go get revenge, we don't know. But it says he withdrew. He got in a boat and went across the sea. But when he got there, he discovered that the people had followed him on foot. They were so drawn to Jesus, so drawn to his message, so drawn to the signs that he had performed, the healing that he had provided, that they beat him to the other side of the sea on foot. I don't know how that happens. That's obviously the longer way around the Sea of Galilee. But they beat him there. And Jesus, needing to withdrawing to the other side of the lake where Herod Antipas would have no authority, finds the crowds there. And they're so drawn to them that he has compassion on them. And of course, in Matthew 9:36, we're told that Jesus has already looked out on the crowd and understands that they are sheep without a shepherd. And that is what drives his compassion for them. For the world in which they live had no provision for them. It had only fear. It had only desperation. It had only suffering. For the Herods of the world were not going to be their shepherds. The Pharisees and Sadducees of that time were not going to be their shepherds. These were the unclean, the unholy, after all. Why would we let them come worship with us? But Jesus is there, and it says he heals many of the sick. And yet it's interesting because the Greek there actually is more properly translated the weak. He healed the weak. Those who were powerless, those who'd been trampled on, those who were suffering injustice, Jesus brought healing and provision to. And we know the debate that goes on with Jesus and his disciples in this moment, where they say, hey, it's evening. They need to go back to town and get something to eat. And Jesus says, as we did in our call to worship, you give them something to eat. Disciples are astounded. They look out on this crowd of not 5,000, but 5,000 plus women and children. There were 5,000 men there, but there was probably a number much greater as their families had accompanied them. So they take the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus holds the bread and blesses it, giving thanks to the Father. And they distribute the food. And we know what happens when we read the story. Everyone was filled. Everyone was provided for. And there were 12 baskets of leftovers. Jesus offers a banquet of love, of grace, of forgiveness, of healing, of empowerment in the face of the banquet of this world that offers suffering, that offers fear, that offers sorrow. And so we ask again, which banquet do we want to attend? Because it's a question that confronts us each and every day as we make decisions about how we live our lives. And we understand that the sheep without a shepherd is actually a reference to passages such as those in Ezekiel 34, where Jesus talks about the sheep having no shepherd and how the sheep were scattered across the earth only to be devoured because the shepherds, instead of feeding them, were making themselves fat, it says. But Ezekiel's prophesying of the kingdom of Jesus, and he talks about a shepherd who will, this will sound familiar because it's a psalm we recite often, who makes the sheep lie down and feed in green pastures. We start to see that even our favorite psalm, in Psalm 23, deals with the sheep without a shepherd being cared for, finding justice in the face of injustice, hope in the face of despair, joy in the face of sorrow. It talks about this shepherd who will feed the sheep instead of making himself fat. And it talks about a shepherd who will, when time comes, judge between the sheep and the goats. Again, that sounds familiar because those are words that we will encounter in the Gospel of Matthew in just a few weeks as Jesus talks about the nations standing before him. So Jesus is the great shepherd. Jesus is the host of the banquet that offers empowerment by the Spirit, that offers provision in scarcity, that offers hope in despair, joy and sorrow. But yet there's more to the story. Because not only are we invited to come to the banquet, we are called to host the banquet. Because if you notice, Jesus broke the bread. Jesus, yes, makes the loaves and fish enough to feed the multitude. But Jesus looks at his disciples and says, "You give them something to eat." So we are here, we are called to look out, see the sheep without a shepherd, and to go out in our community, in our world with compassion, understanding that there is a horrendous banquet going on that is trampling over the weak, that is bringing hurt instead of healing, that is laughing in their face while the shepherds are getting fat. It is up to us to go out as followers of Christ and to gather the sheep with the grace and love of Jesus Christ, with the joy that is offered, though the spread on our table at times seems so modest. We can't compete in terms of resources with what the other banquet has to offer, at least not as it appears, because the resources blessed by God will go much further. The resources that come from the banquet that we are first invited to and then we are called to host will stretch further than we can ever believe. Because I understand the disciples' thought here, because we can look on this world that we live in. We can see the amount of poverty around us. We can see how many poor there are in this world. We can see how many are scattered sheep without a shepherd. We can see how many have been discounted in this world as being worthless, as being seemingly beyond redemption, labeled by those around them as not worthy of effort. And we can see it as a very daunting task. How can we have enough to feed the sheep? How can we do enough to gather the sheep together? And the answer is, we will take what we have out of our love for Christ, our faithfulness to God. We will offer up thanks, bless it, break it, then offer it to the world. Because when it's blessed by God, and when it's broken to be given, it's amazing how far the grace that's been poured into our hearts to be shared with this world can be stretched. It's amazing how far that the extra that we have can be shared with the world around us if we're willing to let go of it. It's amazing what we can do, empowered by God, in Boyd, Texas, on the 114 and 730 corridors, in this state and in this country and in this world, to reveal the kingdom of God in a way that people never expected to see it take place. Because even our religion in our time so often is used to beat people down, to make people think that they're not worthy of approaching God's person. Yet here is Jesus, who discounts no one, who approaches all. Jesus even approaches the shepherds who are making themselves fat rather than feeding the sheep, to give them the opportunity to receive the love that God offers all. Jesus' love is radical. God's provision is powerful. And it all comes down to answering the question, what banquet do we want to go to? And the temptation is great to go to the other banquet, even though it doesn't offer much. For some it does. For those who are able to go to the banquet and get and fatten themselves and engorge themselves, it's a great banquet. And the temptation is great to try and be one of those who can engorge themselves at that banquet. Because when we look out, we do think it's a daunting, daunting task. But it brings us to our series over the next few weeks. It brings us to the idea, like you see on the t-shirts, keep calm. And they started with keep calm and carry on, or keep calm and chive on, all these random things. Well, today our call is when we're faced with the situation in this world, when we see the level of poverty in this world, when we see the amount of injustice that just continues to grow around us, as people are neglected, as people are abused, as people are taken advantage of. The call on us is to keep calm and compassion on. Now, I know the horrible thing about this phrase, especially for teachers in this room, is that that's horrible grammar. But it's memorable, I hope. Keep calm and compassion on. We may be like the disciples and think, we don't have enough to feed the lost sheep that you brought out into this wilderness. Send them to the town, to that other banquet. Maybe they'll find some morsels there. But Jesus is telling them, keep calm. You're at a banquet that's far greater than any other banquet in this world. So keep calm. Take what you have. Bless it and break it. And compassion on. So we come to this table today. This table where we'll break this bread. This bread that is symbolic of what Christ did for each and every one of us, for all of us scattered sheep in this world. It's one loaf, symbolizing that we're all God's children. And God's love comes from one source to be offered to all. But we will break it, symbolizing the breaking of Christ and the crucifixion, but also symbolizing that we, each and every one of us, are offered the grace of God through Christ. Each and every scattered sheep in this world is offered that love and grace. We will bless it. We will break it. We will share it together. And then we will seek to go from here today and share it with the world. Both in word, the word that says, whatever you feel makes you unworthy of God's presence in your life, God has already forgiven you for. You just have to turn and receive it. Or you have to admit that you need forgiveness so that you can turn and receive it. It is a good news that tells us that beyond forgiveness, God will empower you through the Spirit to overcome that which in your own life is causing destruction and that which beyond yourself from external sources is causing suffering in your life. Because God seeks to sanctify your life in this world. The life which we live into now is not the life we must assume we will always live, because God is at work. So let us keep calm and compassion on. Let us take what little we may feel we have and understand that blessed and broken with thanksgiving to God in the name of Christ, the sheep it can feed and can gather together that have been scattered by those who have wreaked injustice against them will be countless if we'll but be faithful. So let us join Christ in hosting the banquet and keep calm and compassion on. In the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit, amen.